listen. That is the wonderful sound of 2,000 people consciously listening. It's a skill, ladies and gentlemen, not a natural aptitude. It's a skill that is essential if you're going to succeed in a fast-changing world. Listening for you as individuals and leaders, critical. Listening for your organizations, also critical. I'm going to focus on that through the course of this talk at both levels. Listening is a crucial skill. It's a skill that yields all sorts of benefits for you as leaders. It's very difficult to lead people if you don't listen to them. It's very difficult to understand people. Conscious listening is always the doorway to understanding. It's how you build relationships. What's the most common complaint in relationships? He or she never listens to me. And yet it's something we underplay. At stake are three crucial things. I think they're things that you probably care about as much as I do. And those are your happiness, your effectiveness, and your well-being. And not only yours, because you're leading organizations, those of the people who work with you and for you, and those of your families when you go home in the evening. Happiness, effectiveness, well-being, fundamentally affected by how well you listen. Now, as you listen to me through the next 40 minutes or so, I'd like you to listen through a lens for three things. Three things you can take away which start with the words, I will or I will not. I'm talking about behavior change. Three practical things that you can change in your behavior from this moment on, which will make a difference and give you more happiness, effectiveness, and well-being. So feel free to take notes, or if you have a great memory, remember them. I'd love this to be not one of those talks where you go away and say, yeah, he was really good. I can't remember what he said, but it was really good. I'd love this to be something which does not evaporate like a puddle in the sun. I'd love this to be something which causes you to change course and get more happiness, effectiveness, and well-being. Is that okay? Great. Let me start with sound. You're listening to voices in the context we're talking about. Voice is sound. Sound itself affects you in four powerful ways. Sound is immensely powerful. And I'm going to ask you as a listening organization, as heads of listening organizations, to listen to all sound because it all has an effect. Unfortunately, most of us have a relationship with sound that's a little bit like this, don't we? We don't think about it very much at all. And yet sound is affecting you every day in four powerful ways. Here they are. Well, that's the first one. Physiologically. That was a little shot of cortisol I gave you. If your alarm clock sounds like that at home, please change it. It's not good for you. Any sudden sound we will interpret as a threat. Naturally, hundreds of thousands of years have taught us to be safe that way. So your heart rate just jumped, your breathing changed, your hormone secretions changed. Cortisol is a fight-flight hormone. Let me calm you down again. This is gentle surf. A very good sound if you have a problem sleeping. Very similar to the breathing of a sleeping human being. And a reassuring sound. We associate it with being on a beach, not a care in the world. I won't leave it on for too long right now, for obvious reasons. It's early in the morning. I'm not sure how much coffee you've had. So the second way sound affects you is psychologically. We know music changes our feelings. I'm sure you're going to hear more about that from Ben Zander at the end of today. Music is a very powerful deliverer of emotion. It's not the only sound that changes our feelings, though. Birdsong is a sound we use in my company, the Sound Agency, a great deal. I'll talk more about that later. Because we feel when the birds are singing, things are safe. It makes us feel secure. It's also nature's alarm clock, time to be awake. So it's a very, very good sound to work to. Mind alert, body relaxed, good working state. The third way sound affects you is cognitively.
If
You
you're
can't
listening to this
understand
version
two
of me,
people talking at the
you're on
same
the wrong
time,
track.
or in this case,
Try
one
and focus
person
on the one
talking
that's
twice.
talking on the stage.
You can't do it, can you? We have bandwidth for roughly 1.6 human conversations, not 2, which is why people who work in offices that sound like this, particularly if you can hear one person talking next to you, it is devastating for productivity. Now, you may be working in a small office on your own and not conscious of this so much, but open plan is becoming de rigueur across the world. I will come back to this one later as well, because open plan is a disaster for focused working. Very good for collaboration, very poor for concentration. And we need to think about that. You need to think about that if you want to get the most out of your people. I'll give you some tips on that later. The final way sound affects you is behaviorally. So ask yourself, is this person going to drive at a steady 35 kilometers per hour? Something tells me not. And actually the research backs this up. This kind of music, or whatever your version of it would be, changes how fast we drive, how often we change lanes, and how dangerous we are. So sound changes our behavior. Fundamentally, we will move away from unpleasant sound if we can. So if I were to put this on and leave it for the next 38 minutes, I don't think you'd be sitting here. You'd leave. Of course you would. If we can't leave and we're surrounded by noise, it has serious effects on our health. Now, we work a great deal in the retail industry for that reason. Obviously, it's stupid to have a terrible smell in a shop. People would leave. It is incredible how many malls and stores have terrible sound. And what do you and I do? We leave. Or we leave sooner than we otherwise would. The result is catastrophic for dwell time and retail sales. So retailers are starting to learn that lesson. And I want to give you a lovely little retail case study which will prove to you how sound affects you and how it can change your behavior and that of your employees in a profound way. This was an academic case study done by a group of academics in the UK in a supermarket. 2 gondola ends, one with French wine, one with German wine, absolutely identical displays, nothing between them at all, and all they did was to alternate the music. So on day 1, you had a little bit of this, and on day 2, a little bit of that. That always makes people laugh, that piece of music. So what happened? On the French music days, French wine outsold German wine by 5 bottles to 1, which may not be surprising. It does sell more on the world market. But on the German music days, German wine outsold French wine by 2 bottles to 1. Now, this is not a conscious reaction, ladies and gentlemen. This is not, German music, therefore I should buy German wine. It doesn't work like that. This was unconscious. This is the effect on your behavior of the sound around you all the time. It pays to pay attention. Simply by making pleasant sound, we can create environments which are much more pleasant for people to be in. So a couple of case studies from the sound agencies work around the world. This is Glasgow Airport, where we installed this very relaxing, generative soundscape. It's created live by a computer, birdsong, slow pace. There's a lot of science behind this. People felt more relaxed, and the airport was pretty chuffed because sales in the shops went up by 10%. I guess people had more time to go shopping. One other case study I'll give you, the city of Lancaster in California, up in the Mojave Desert. We installed this soundscape down the main street, and the shopkeepers loved it, and the sheriff reported that crime fell 15% after this soundscape went in, because it's calming. Same reason the London Underground tube stations have classical music playing, 140 of them now actually, because they have established through research that this reduces abuse and attacks on staff substantially. Sound changes our behavior. Now, the problem that I'd like to bring to you is that we don't pay attention to speaking or listening very important sounds as much as we should. Here are the 4 ways we communicate: reading, writing, speaking, listening. And I present them here with equal weight, but that is not the way we treat them in school or in society, is it? It's a scandal if a child leaves school unable to read or write. Children leave school every year, millions of them, never having been taught how to use this incredible instrument that we all possess, the human voice, and even less so, how to listen. It's a lot more like this, isn't it? In the way we treat them. So let's focus on speaking and listening for the rest of this time we have together. Now, I want to challenge one assumption that many people have. You may have it too, which is that it's a simple linear relationship. I speak, you listen. It's not like that. Not at all. Actually, speaking and listening are in a circular relationship. The way I speak affects the way you listen. The way you listen affects the way I speak. The way I speak affects the way you speak. The way I listen affects the way you listen. It is dynamic, organic, circular, and complex. And it all happens inside of a context, which very often is not ideal. I happen to have a pretty good context here. I have a massive sound system, and you're all sitting facing me, not talking or doing anything else. Very rare that we get such a perfect context, isn't it? If you've ever tried to pitch a business idea in a busy Starbucks, you'll know what I'm talking about. Noise, bad acoustics, that kind of thing. Let's actually start with context, because I want to give you some ideas for your office which may improve productivity, happiness, well-being substantially. Let me explain how acoustics play out. This is a classroom, and when I see this, I'm forced to ask myself this question, because you think how that is going to sound with 40 kids doing group work. Where are the soft surfaces in that room? The sound is just going to bounce around. The reverb can be as high as 1.5 seconds in a classroom or a meeting room. Now, I'm using classroom here because that's where the research comes from. This applies just as much to your meeting rooms at work. If reverberation is 1.2 seconds, with some background noise, this is what you get.
In language, infinitely many words can be written with a small set of letters. In arithmetic, infinitely...
Do you fancy having your education like that? Because millions of children do. They simply can't hear what they're being taught. If you take the reverberation time down to 0.4 seconds, the same signal, the same background noise, sounds like this.
In language, infinitely many words can be written with a small set of letters. In arithmetic, infinitely many numbers can be
Now, I promise you, that's the same. German schools are running at 65 decibels. If I'm teaching, I have to shout like this to get over 65 decibels. And I imagine that is probably very common here in Denmark, all over Europe, all over the world, because of group work and bad acoustics. The black dots on that chart are the noise level. The red dots are the teacher's heart rate. The teacher's heart rate. Now, that's pretty serious. 65 dB is not ear-threatening. That's around 85 that you have to offer protection. Nevertheless, it is bad for health, because research now shows that if you're exposed to 65 decibels constantly, your risk of heart attack is substantially increased. Teachers may be shortening their lives by working in this environment. You and your employees, if your office is noisy like that, are equally suffering the same sort of health issues. Sound can do good, sound can do harm. The green side of this chart shows you the good things that can come if you get good sound in your office. People feel good, good body chemistry. They are more resistant to disease. Secretory immunoglobulin is how we resist a lot of diseases. So you'll have less days off sick. They're more focused, they're happier, and they are more committed. The red side is what you get if your office has got lots of noise in it. People get ill, people are unhappy and unfocused. If you have offices which look like this, that is likely to be the case, ladies and gentlemen. Architects love hard surfaces, steel, stone, glass, metal, all that kind of stuff. You'd have to tell people in this office what shoes to wear to work, I think, wouldn't you? All the sound is going to bounce around. And equally, when you're giving people a break, you need to give them a restful environment. I recorded this in an advertising agency in London, in their cafeteria space. Now, I like Metallica as much as the next guy, but perhaps not when I'm trying to have a quiet sandwich after a busy morning. No wonder she looks like that. The Leesman Index is something I urge you to check out. It's a fantastic survey of hundreds of thousands of people about their office conditions. Very smart, because it asks just 2 questions, and it allows you to compare the effect on a finance director to the effect on a sales executive. They're different people, different productivity, but Leesman simply says, how important is this thing to you? And how satisfied are you with it? Now, noise in offices is very important to people. Actually, it's the #1 complaint in the modern world. So you can see nearly 80% of them say it's very or quite important to them. Having quiet working space, equally, we're very poor at establishing that and giving people places they can go and think. How satisfied are they with those things? Not very. Noise is the #1 productivity killer in the modern office. And if you want to get this right, I suggest that you focus on the green side of this chart. What we want to hear is somebody talking to us or the little voice in our head where we're trying to work. Background noise that can support that is biophilic sound, nature sound, very supportive. It could also be babble, just gentle office babble where you can't make out one voice. Sparse music, not too dense, because music's made to be listened to, and if it's dense, it takes a lot of attention away. And possibly, you might want to try masking noise, although the evidence is starting to show, you know the sound I'm talking about, like air conditioning all day. That kind of sound, which creates some privacy, but it also is being shown now to increase stress levels and make people fatigued. On the negative side, what we don't want is unwanted speech and phones. Ringing phones, extremely distracting. And background noise that you may have in your office, which I strongly advise you to take care of. Reflections from bad acoustics. Sudden sounds or new sounds, which we find very distracting. Repetitious sounds get very irritating. Don't put a loop of birdsong on, because that cuckoo is going to drive people mad after a day or two. And electromechanical noise of all kinds. And finally, dense, pounding music. Great if you're creative, not so good if you're trying to write an essay or a report or file some copy. 3 sounds that are very good, very productive. Can you guess what WWB stands for? So all biophilic sounds. These sounds have been around a lot longer than we have on this planet, a lot longer, and we find it very easy to set them aside. We find them comforting, and they actually are now being shown by research to be good for the health, helping people to recover from stroke, from heart attack, and all sorts of conditions. These sounds are positive, and they're very good to work to. I'm excited to say at the Sound Agency we've launched something now to take on this problem of millions of people with poor productivity all around the world in open plan offices. It's called MoodSonic, and it is biophilic. It's generative, so it's created live by computer, and it's scientifically designed to support working and create well-being. So that is something I'm really excited about. Now, that's enough on context, but I think you'll agree there's plenty there for you to take home and think about. Let's speak about speaking for a moment before I get on to the core topic, which is listening. Speaking is immensely powerful. It's probably the most powerful sound in the world, the human voice, isn't it? I want to give you a couple of habits to look out for, which if you have to do this, or present to people, or lead a team, you need to speak in power. These habits are like holes in the bucket. They leak power out. They will make you harder to listen to. They're very common. Here's the first one. Now, we all like looking good, don't we? Nevertheless, if it becomes the focus of what you're doing, If you speaking is about looking good, impressing people, and so forth, there's a shallowness to it. People can detect that. And it also gives rise to a couple of habits which aren't particularly pleasant. For example, competitive speaking. I might say, I'm going to Greece on holiday this year. And the other person goes, oh yeah, I've been to Greece 6 times. Oh, that's my little bit of joy killed, isn't it? Do you know anybody who does that, who has to hesitate to use the word, who has to trump what everybody's saying, who has to always be better, grander, bigger, more impressive? Also, speech writing, a very common habit, comes from this looking good. And that is, while this inconvenient noise is going on in front of me, I'm actually writing my next brilliant bit of dialogue. That's not listening. And it also gives rise to the anyway interjection, which is demeaning to the person who's speaking and tends to upset people. So, looking good, very nice, but please don't make it the reason for speaking. And if there's one thing we like more than looking good, ladies and gentlemen, it's being right, isn't it? Now, the easiest way to be right is to make somebody else wrong. And that, sadly, is at the heart of what we're seeing in politics around the world. There's a huge amount of shouting, making people wrong, being right. It's a natural inclination, but it tends to lead to outrage addiction. Somebody's to blame. Who's the bad person? Because if there's somebody to blame, they're worse, I'm better, I feel good. Please try to look out for that one, because you don't learn a lot if you are being right all the time. The American author Harville Hendricks said, you can either be right or be in a relationship. I think there's a lot of truth in that, isn't there? So, those 2 things to look out for. Now, the people that you're selling to, same as you and me, are facing a tidal wave of stuff, content. Never has there been so much inbound, whether it's email that you end up checking late at night, or whether you're always on, life gives you stuff to be dealing with the whole time, this sense of overwhelm, mixed with a FOMO. You know, FOMO, fear of missing out. So there's this paranoia that I'm missing something and this huge pressure of dealing with all this stuff. What do they need more than anything else in that world from you? They need you to be a trusted guide. What a wonderful couple of words that is. Immediately brings relief. There's somebody I can trust to guide me through this stuff, this area, this part of the tidal wave of content. Your brands, your organizations can be the stars of this virtual universe where so much is now happening virtually. There's an audio revolution coming, ladies and gentlemen, and that's why wrapping content around and delivering good content is going to be the way forward for you. Why do I say that? Well, this is how it is at the moment, isn't it? This blizzard of stuff that we have to deal with. It's not going to be like that for much longer. It isn't. Because we have technology right now which is developing very fast, which is having billions spent on it, which is going to change that fundamentally. That is intelligent agents that we will speak to and listen to, and very soon those will be artificially intelligent agents. Something like Jarvis from Iron Man. You'll be talking to your intelligent agent. It will deal with all the apps, the blizzard, and so forth. It will help to filter all this stuff. Now, what does that mean for you as organizations? 2 very important things. 1, audio becomes dominant. We're not going to be typing and looking in the same way we have, because we'll be talking to devices. In our ear, smart speakers, which are already prevalent, and ultimately, I would think in my lifetime and yours, probably embedded implants in our skull so that it's completely seamless and we are always on and able to talk, but with a filter. So you need to make sound carefully and intentionally. At the same time, you need to deliver content because the gatekeeper is a robot. You're going to be marketing through a robot gatekeeper in the future. That makes life tougher. The only things I'm going to let in through that gatekeeper will be brands I like, brands that are delivering value to me, and that is why you're already seeing many, many brands get into content creation. Think what Amazon is doing right now, what Apple is doing right now. Because content is what draws us and causes us to make a hole in our gatekeeper and say, let Apple in. I like what they're doing. That's where you need to go, ladies and gentlemen. So what kind of sound do you need to make? Audio branding is what my business has been doing for 16 years, so I'll share with you some of the basic principles that we apply. It starts with guidelines. Just as you might have a brand book or a brand Bible, put something in there about sound now. If you're not audible in the future, you're going to be pretty invisible as well, I would suggest. So guidelines, and then some core assets that you'll need to create and own. Maybe a sonic logo, the same as your visual logo, but in sound. Something about voice, something about music, something about soundscapes in spaces that you own and you want to manage. And then think about where to deploy those assets. So this is the scenario. You have deployments, you have assets, and you have guidelines. It's a structure for getting the sound of your organization right. I'll give you a couple of examples of these things. Sonic logo, first of all. If you're thinking, what's he talking about, sonic logo? Could you draw Intel's logo? Can you hear Intel's logo? That's what the Intel logo looks like. I don't know how many of you could have drawn it. I think most of you probably had that in your head. It's very memorable. It's worth hundreds of millions of dollars to Intel, and it is an enormously powerful part of their brand, trademarked as well. A couple more examples. If you travel in France on the railways, you may notice this sound. That's SNCF's Sonic logo. You hear it all over the place. Now, there's quite a healthy relationship between bands and brands. Normally, it goes that somebody takes some music and turns it into a bit of marketing. In this case, it went the other way, because Dave Gilmour, the lead guitarist from Pink Floyd, was traveling in France, and he heard that, and he liked it so much, he turned it into a song, which is the lead song on his last album. So these sounds can be extremely iconic. And I'll just finish this with one of the most wonderful sounds ever created. Of course, it has to be, because it's for the brand THX, which is all about sound, and I can't wait to hear it through this sound system. So sit back and enjoy one of the best sonic logos ever created. Well, I don't know if that made your hair stand on end. It did to me. It's a fantastic sound. So sonic logos can be enormously powerful. You might want to think about brand music as well. If you ever travel on this airline, you've probably heard this piece of music. It's the Flower Duet from the opera Lakme by Delibes. And British Airways have been using this for years and years and years, everywhere, on the phone, in the plane, in the lounge, on the website, and so on and so forth. A few years ago, they changed their advertising agency. Watch out for this, because the new agency came in, and as they do, said, let's get rid of the old stuff and do something new and dynamic. So this is what they did.
We believe your holiday should start before you arrive. You're our guest.
Now that's a song called Leaving on a Jet Plane, which sounds like a good idea until you realize the second line goes, don't know when I'll be back again. Might not be the best message for business travelers, or indeed their families. It was written by a guy called John Denver, who died in a plane crash. Perhaps not the greatest decision that had ever been made. And do you know what happened when they did that? Regardless of those two things, British Airways received thousands, literally thousands, of complaints from customers saying, where's that lovely classical music? Because they knew something BA didn't. That was part of the brand. An important part of the brand, and they were just throwing it out as if it were worthless. I wonder if there's music you could associate with or get written that could powerfully express your brand. In America, do you know what the fastest form of marketing is? Well, you do now, because I've just put it on screen. It's podcasting. Look at that growth rate. Enormous. Very cheap to do podcasting in sound. Sadly for us, sound is much cheaper to make than video. So it's not a huge investment, and yet it is getting millions and millions of people engaged. Some of the biggest brands in the US have been using these things. Sponsored podcasts, messaging in podcasts, or podcasts about what they do. You can do wonderful things with podcasting right now. And with smart speakers and audio technology moving the way it is, this is a powerful thing you need to be considering, ladies and gentlemen. If you're going to speak as an organization, I want to give you 4 foundations to stand on. Same as if you're speaking as an individual to another human being. So these apply at both levels. They form a word. The word is hail, which is quite handy. It's a word that means to greet or acclaim enthusiastically. I wonder if you can guess what they stand for. The 4 foundations of powerful speaking. The H is honesty, being clear and being straight in what you say. That's a great way to communicate with customers, prospects, and the outside world, and as a human being. The A is authenticity, being yourself, not pretending, not play acting, not disguising, but simply being yourself, genuine and real. The I is integrity, being your word. If you say it, it happens. You know that's crucial as a leader. If you make promises and they never happen, your words end up having no weight at all, don't they? And the L, surprisingly, perhaps is love. I do not mean romantic love. I'm talking about wishing people well, simply wishing people well. Now let's move on to the listening side, the most important part of the conversation. I think this is so true. Listening is a huge advantage in life and in business. Unfortunately, we're losing our listening, and I think there are many reasons for this. I'll touch on a couple. We've invented ways to record things. 4,000 years ago, we invented writing. We've been speaking with complex language for well over 100,000 years. Writing is very recent, but it's taken over. So when I say to you communication, you immediately start visualizing written or visual communication. The world is getting more and more impatient. We're seeing this in politics, aren't we? Soundbite politics. Politicians go off for talks all the time. I wish they'd go off and have listens instead. Don't you think the world would be a better place if they did? However, this is what we're facing. And technology is driving this incessant lack of listening, this numbing of our listening. Very much, I hope you've never sent this text or received this text, but it does get sent and it does get received. There's no listening in this. That's not a conversation, is it? And social media, of course, are making things worse. Email overload, social media like these things are numbing us again. Social media is what I call personal broadcasting. It's this fantasy. There are thousands of people out there hanging on my every move. I'm on a train. Who cares, really? Not important, but we have this outbound obsession. If you're interested in that, there's a great book by TED speaker Sherry Turkle, professor at MIT, called Alone Together, which is all about the effect of technology on our communication and relationships. Now, listening, ladies and gentlemen, I define as making meaning from sound. You select things to pay attention to, you ascribe meaning to them. And the key thing to understand about your listening is that it is unique. Unique. Nobody listens like you do. It's a huge mistake to assume everybody listens like I do. They do not. Why? Because we listen through a set of filters. These are the filters. Your values, attitudes, beliefs, the culture that you're born into, the language you speak, your intentions, expectations, emotions, all of these things create what I call a listening position for you. They're fixed. Most of us are in one listening position. We have these filters fixed and we're not conscious of them. These filters actually create your reality. It's different from the person sitting next to you because you're choosing different things to pay attention to and you're ascribing different meanings. Now, let me tell you what this means, and this may be a transformational thing you can take home with you. Whether you're speaking to thousands like I am now, or to one person, you always speak into a listening. There are thousands of different listenings in this room, and they make one big listening. And I am asking myself the question all the time, what's the listening I'm speaking into? That is a key question. If you want to be a powerful speaker, then ask yourself this question over and over again, and you will get good at it, I promise you. Now, sadly, organizations are not very good at listening. This is a big piece of research that was done some years ago, and this is what it found. Organizations are terrible at listening. I wonder if you can guess what this is. It's the average length of time in America that you get to speak at a doctor's appointment before the doctor interrupts you. Average. Some are much quicker. 18 seconds. Where's the listening in that? We have this fascination with sending, with speaking. It's a much more powerful. My TED Talk on speaking has been seen by 6 times as many people as my TED Talk on listening. That tells us something, doesn't it? The balance in the organizational listening project was not this. They found that 80% of organizational resources are in outbound communication. Only 20%, and this was self-reported, so it's probably exaggerated as well. 20% of the money, time, and effort went into listening. That's not good enough. Do you know why? Because the listening organizations, those that were rated higher in that survey, had more of the stuff on the right-hand side. Better morale, greater customer and staff loyalty, greater customer and staff retention, higher productivity, and a better reputation. If you want that stuff, and I know you do, you need to be a listening organization. Go the other way, and you get the stuff on the red side of that chart. So how do you go about doing this? Well, it's actually quite complicated. It takes effort. I'm sorry there's no quick fix. Across the top here are maybe the people you would want to listen to. What do you put in place? The structures. First of all, it has to come from you. And this is why I keep talking about your listening as well as your organization's listening. It has to come from the top. You can't simply send a memo out saying, from tomorrow, could you all listen much better? Thank you very much. It doesn't work like that. So you need to be committed and communicate it really well to everybody. That means changing your culture, probably. Certainly changing people's behavior very much. You need to ask yourself the question I've asked you, are the spaces in which we work appropriate for good listening? And, of course, you need to train people. You need to make them accountable. And that means rewarding good listening in appraisals. If you have 360 appraisals, is there a question in there? How good is this person at listening? Crucial to put that in there. What are you listening for? The good stuff, opportunity, and the bad stuff, risk, threat. And most of all, the gold dust is listening for ideas, ways to improve the business. If you have complaints come in, that's a suggestion for an improvement. So many complaints departments are simply trying to say sorry and give you 5,000 air miles and make you go away. Are they feeding that at you? You're the 10th person today who's complained about that. Something needs to change. So what are they listening for? Become a listening leader. There are 4 C's in effective listening for you. Here they are. You need to know that you're doing something. It's conscious listening, not a habit. It's committed. You're making time to listen to people. It's compassionate. You're seeking to understand people, and curiosity is a wonderful place to be if you want to be a good listener. 4 C's of effective listening. I'm going to close with 3 exercises which you can take home and do anywhere, which will improve your listening skills. Here's the first one. Silence. Re-establish your relationship with silence. The world is noisy, it numbs us. Give yourself a few minutes of silence or relative peace and quiet a few times a day, and you will calm, reset your ears, recalibrate, reassociate yourself with the baseline for all sound, and listen better. Here's the second one. The Sanskrit word rasa means juice. In this context, it's an acronym which stands for receive, appreciate, summarize, ask. Receive means pay attention, looking at the person who's listening. You know, I am listening to you. No, you're not. You're sending a text. That's a different thing. Listening is paying attention. The A is appreciate, the little noises and facial movements which show you're there and paying attention. Oh, really? All that sort of stuff. S, summarize, the word so, a very, very important word. So, what we've agreed is this. Now we can move on to that. So closes doors in the corridor of a conversation. It locks things down behind you. So what I've understood you're saying is this. Is that correct? It's a very powerful word. If you don't have a so person in a meeting, it can be a very long meeting, can't it? What is it they say? Meetings are places where you take minutes and waste hours. Very often the case. If you don't have somebody doing the so, you go round and round. And the A, ask questions all the way through at the beginning, in the middle, at the end. It shows engagement and it teases out the information you want. Open questions, why, what, where, when, who, which, and so forth. Rasa. It's a very powerful way of improving communication. The third exercise I want to give you is changing your listening position. Now, I said earlier that you've been listening from one place because your filters are fixed and you don't pay attention to them. Most people don't. You can move. And this gets really exciting. In order to clarify, I'll give you some examples of listening positions. Active listening, used in the therapeutic professions. What I heard you say is, and then you repeat exactly what the person said. Leaves people feeling heard. Very important. Useful if you have teenage children as well. Ladies and gentlemen, that one. You wouldn't want to do it all the time. You wouldn't have many friends if this is what you did all the time. What I heard you say is, passive listening, on the other hand, disengage the meaning making and simply enjoying the sound of a bubbling brook or bird song. Critical listening. Now that's where you are now. You're paying attention. The little voice in your head is going, I didn't know that. Where did he get that from? Don't agree with that. That's interesting. That's critical listening. Very useful for business. Not so good if you take it home all the time. You need to move from that. People get stuck in this one probably more than any other. On the other end of this scale, you might have empathic listening. Going onto the other person's island, feeling their feelings, leaving them feeling understood. Here's a little gender stereotype alert. Men, not all men, not all the time, men tend to listen in a way I call reductive. That is to say, for a point, to solve a problem, to reach a destination. There's an end point here. Women, not all women, not all the time, tend to listen in a way I call expansive. Now, in expansive listening, there is no point. It's not about reaching a destination. It's about being on a journey with the other person. It doesn't matter where it goes. It's enjoying the journey. So you'll get a situation, if they're locked into these gender stereotypes, she comes home, says, I've had a dreadful day. This happened, this happened, this happened. He says, looking up from the football, have a bath, darling. That always makes you feel better. In the male world, that's problem solved. Back to the football. In the female world, that wasn't quite what she was looking for. She was looking for, you poor thing, darling, sit down, have a glass of wine, tell me all about it. Those words that strike fear into most male hearts. Tell me all about it. Now, if we get locked in these positions, this, I think, is at the root of much of that he or she never listens to me stuff. Distracted listening. Try not to be there. Technology is so distracting. There's stuff around us all the time. Much better if you can be in the focused listening position where it matters. Final one I'll give you, listening from fear. Can't do that. This might go wrong. That might go wrong. Always hearing the problems. Now, you're entrepreneurs, many of you. And I think the secret of entrepreneurialism is largely listening from faith. Let's cross this bridge. It'll be okay. We'll get to the other side. Let's move on. Come with me. That's the confidence of an entrepreneur. It's a listening position to life. Now, if you think this is all quite complicated, you could join the International Listening Association. It's a really good thing. It's not very expensive. And they have many, many tools which will help you to become a listening organization. There are courses on the internet. I would immodestly say my book might help you as well. Ladies and gentlemen, if we have a world where we are speaking consciously and listening consciously, there is only one outcome. And I think you might agree with me that this is an outcome we badly need today in business, with the pace of change, and in politics as well. That outcome is understanding. Understanding other human beings, what makes them tick, how we can serve them, engage them, add value to their lives. That's what you're about, as far as I understand it. That's what we need in the world, and it comes from listening. 3 things I hope you've got. Maybe more than 3, that's great. But I hope you've got 3 things, starting with I will or I will not change of behavior. Because there are 3 things at stake. Let me remind you: your happiness, your effectiveness, and your well-being. Now, I've covered a lot of ground today. I've only been able to give you 3 listening exercises. If you would like more listening exercises, I am going to make the slides from this available as well. So all you need to do is go to my website, and then when we send you the first listening exercise, just reply with President's slides, and I will send you this whole deck as a PDF so that you can remember what I've been talking about. This has been a lot of ground, and you're probably a little bit like that now. Ladies and gentlemen, it only remains for me to say thank you very much for lending me your ears today. Thank you.